Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
So what I'd say to them is you know a lot of people and you share in communities too. So if you know of someone that's curious about the scene, or maybe they've been racing a little bit, and want that exposure. I mean, we've really designed a camp that's really going to expose them to different people and different experiences, and hopefully new friendships. So I would encourage anyone that's listening to kind of share it within their network.
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
Say the word, Chef.
Let it rip.
Welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. Episode 117. Amazing. Hard to believe we've done this 117 times. More amazing that you're here, still listening. Thank you for that. Today's episode throws a big spotlight on the upcoming Soar Women Plus Adventure Racing Retreat, coming this March 2025 in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. Jen, Karyn, and Britt join us to talk about the retreat, their goals, and the weekend. And we get some insight on Karyn and Britt's success at the USARA National Championships this past year as the Women of AR team. So thanks for being here. Be sure to check out the show notes for all that's going on. All the links mentioned in the episode are there. And we love that you're here on the Dark Zone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And remember, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.
This is Bob Miller, founder of Wilderness Traverse. I'm inviting you to join us in July 2025 for our classic Canadian 30-hour adventure race. We're proud to have been selected as the Adventure Racing World Series North America Championship and are excited to welcome the continent's best teams to compete for the Bob the Beaver Trophy and free entry into the 2026 Adventure Racing World Championships. Just 4 hours north of Toronto, Sudbury offers an epic wilderness experience with forests, rugged trails, and abundant lakes. With the World Champs this September in British Columbia, this is the year to race in Canada. And here's a great bonus for our U.S. neighbors. With the strength of the U.S. dollar, it's great value for an incredible experience. Visit wildernesstraverse.com to register.
Imagine a world where young women in Afghanistan and Pakistan rise above societal constraints, embracing their strength and potential. Ascend Athletics is making this vision a reality. Through mountaineering-based leadership training, Ascend empowers girls and women aged 15 to 24 to become courageous leaders in their communities. By conquering physical summits, these young women build self-esteem and develop skills that last a lifetime. Operating since 2015 in Afghanistan, expanding to Pakistan in 2023, Ascend focuses on regions where gender inequality is most pronounced, providing tools for girls and women to lead empowered lives. Join the Dark Zone in supporting these brave young women as they climb towards a brighter future. Visit ascendathletics.org to learn more about and contribute to this transformative mission. And remember, Ascend pays nothing for the spot. We love the work that they do, and the Dark Zone is happy to support it. Welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. 3 guests today. Bit of a high wire act. Always tough having 3 people on the show at one time. But these 3 adventure racers, mountain bikers, outdoor enthusiasts are bringing a setting, an environment for racers called Soar. And we have Jen Tillman, Britt Mason, and Karyn DuLaney on the show to talk about their retreat, their experience. Karyn, you've been on the Dark Zone before. We've spoken before. I know you do a good job talking out loud, so I'll start with you.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me on again. Always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. So Soar is our Women's Plus retreat that's occurring in Frederick, Maryland at the end of March. We are super excited. We have a great team, the 3 of us, as well as a couple others that will be helping out. And we're just looking to really spend a weekend with others in the woods, in that also helping them to learn about the sport of adventure racing, working on different skills. We have some navigational clinics set up, some mountain biking clinics, as well as some workshops. Jen will be leading a confidence workshop. Britt will be leading some mountain bike skills. I will be leading some prehab rehab ideas. So yeah, everything AR.
I had Kim Beckinsale. Kim Beckinsale is a very, very accomplished adventure racer for Australia. And her team is putting together the Amazonian Adventures Race, which is an all-female adventure race in Australia, just right around the corner. So I'm loving the what we're seeing here on both sides of the globe. We're seeing events that are dedicated to developing female athletes, female adventure racers, and bringing all that together. Clearly, the design behind it is creating a retreat of a weekend of having all these things put together is creating a sense of a community and putting that together. This takes a lot of work on your behalf, right? All of us have outside gigs we have to do, right? We all have bills we have to pay, jobs we have to do. And yet, this is something that you're dedicating yourself to bring something together there. Britt, if I could kick it over to you for a second there. Talk about your motivation in playing a role in putting Soar together.
I think Jen and I have spent a lot of time doing community building here locally. We do a lot of group rides. We have a women's irreverent off-road team, gravel and mountain, that we meet up for rides. We have weekend retreats, etc. And we thought that, especially since we just won nationals with Women of AR, we have a little bit of a platform with that. And we wanted to expand it and move into the adventure racing space because there are lots of women in it. They're at various levels of skill, etc. And it's being in an environment with other women can be very open and welcoming. And that's what we're aiming for.
I know, Jen, I know that we were talking before we started recording, and we mentioned adventure racing, and you said you've been dragged around the course. You come to it more from a mountain biking background. Talk about your involvement in Soar and what you want to see come out of the weekend.
I think as I approach this weekend, I'm coming in it as someone that's had a little bit of exposure, but I don't have a lot of skill in it. And I think I'm have a unique perspective. Britt's pretty seasoned adventure racer and certainly got me to try things just a few years ago. But I'd say really the most memorable experiences I had last year, and I've had so many, was when I decided not to race and I'd step behind the tape. And I chose to volunteer at both the AR Nationals in Snowshoe, West Virginia. And then I followed it up at the Two Rivers. Thank you. The Two Rivers held by Rootstock. And there was something about, it's an insane community. I think they kind of got to me because I actually did one of the the transition areas, and I think I stayed up for 38 hours, so which is something abnormal for me, and did not repeat that at the Two Rivers. However, that was that experience of being at that transition that really spoke to me, and it spoke to a different part of me. So we were set up around 6 o'clock, and I think racers started coming in around 10. No, it was even later in the night. It's ridiculous. But what I witnessed, just as an observer and not being involved in it so much, was the camaraderie, the support, the humbleness, the way people really cared for one another. And so that's not something that you necessarily experience, definitely not experience in a road race. You might get a little bit of that in gravel, the spirit of gravel, as they like to say. You might get a little bit of it in mountain biking, but nothing, I believe, kind of matches up to what that teamwork element is about in an adventure race. So going into this event, we do a lot in the mountain bike community, and we're really big believers around women plus and being inclusive. So if you're non-binary, you're trans, or you're trans-masc leaning, you are welcome in our space, no questions asked. But we really want to attract certainly people that have mountain biked before, and we've got a few that are going to lend their expertise just by participating. But there's so many people on the fringes that don't even know what adventure racing is. They have no idea. So we really want to get some of that word out in terms of like, you might be in an adjacent sport, but you haven't tried it. Maybe you don't ever do an adventure race, but maybe you do more of the orienteering or the rogaine, or you just meet different parts of yourself because you're pushing yourself in a different way, being on map and compass or navigating all night and having to rely on one another. It's not a typical race setting. And in terms of what that brings out of you and the opportunities to meet different parts of yourself and be vulnerable and accept help and from your teammates, I think it's an incredible kind of, I'd say, soul satisfying. And it's sticky. It's a really special community. It has a different ethos than many I've touched. So I was drawn in, and it's like, I want to share, I want to emulate that a little bit, create a really safe space for folks. And it ultimately, I mean, we have so many sponsors and partners that are so willing to be generous and give us things. We're hoping that people can meet up at the event in between those workshops, right? While we're breaking bread or having breakfast, and they decide to race together. I mean, we have so many resources coming into this small retreat. It's going to be a great opportunity for anyone that participates.
And it's very clear that there's been a very strong positive reaction to Soar and to the space that you're creating for people who want to attend, who want to take part in that here. And Jen, I completely identify with you. I too have raced bicycles a lot, and there's the spectrum along racing, right? On one end of the spectrum, there's the hardcore road racing scene, and you have the triathlon over here. And as you kind of go across, you pick up, you move into gravel, and then eventually you get into the mountain biking scene, and then eventually you get into, I always feel that the cultural scene that is closest to adventure racing from an ethos perspective is really ultra endurance running. I find that that's a very, very similar kind of community. But that being said, adventure racing lives by itself in this rarefied air where so many things have to come together to be successful as a team. And then there's such fertile ground to do it. And there's the teamwork aspect, and there's so much that's there. Have you found a challenge when the three of you were planning this together? Have you found a challenge of almost choice paralysis, where there's so many things that you could talk about during Soar that it's hard to nail down because you only have a weekend together, right? And there's always there's the meeting in the beginning. We're all getting together and you're doing the icebreakers and you're getting to know each other. And then there's the actual work, and then there's the breakdown at the end. So your window is really small. What was that like? And Britt, I'm going to kick it to you because when I asked that question, you smiled and nodded your head. So I think you might have been involved in that discussion. By the way, future Dark Zone guests, be careful with your facial features because I know what you're thinking. So Britt, like talk me through the challenge you had of we want to do so much at our retreat and we only have so little time.
I started breaking it down at the beginning, and I was like, you don't see it yet, but once we start putting this to a timetable, it runs away because we are culminating it. Sunday is essentially reserved for the Rogaine because Quantic Orienteering Club is hosting a Rogaine at Gambrel at the Frederick Watershed. So we want to give people the opportunity to go and navigate either by themselves or in a group on that course for 4 hours. So you really have Saturdays, your meat and potatoes of all of the things that we're going to do, but we're doing a lot of icebreakers and such on Friday. There's so much you can do. Once upon a time in Illinois, Jerry Bollinger, he had an adventure racing camp, and that one, there were all the ropes involved. Like we did Tyroleans, and it was like, I can't even fathom how we packed all the things in that we did. Plus there was like an 8-hour adventure race on the back end of the long weekend. So we try to do the highlights, and while we want to have a good amount of structure, we also want there to be space for people to truly connect. So be that at a fireside chat or just open questions, we want people to be able to connect to each other and to us, and hopefully, grow relationships that will last beyond this weekend.
Karyn, we were talking before we started here about the different things that you were all going to bring to the event. It clearly, and if I may, and walk me with me if I'm wrong, the goal of the camp is to lower the bar to entry for adventure racing by creating a space where people are safe, where they're comfortable, where they know that they could do these things. And there may be people who listen to this episode who are curious, they're AR curious, and they want to take part in it. As organizers, what have you begun to put together to make that entry easy for the person who might be curious? What skill set do they have to have? How new can they be? Like, what's it like if I'm sitting at home and I'm listening to this podcast and I'm curious about going? I'd like to get a sense of, well, am I going to have a good time because my ability level is low? Like, what guardrails are you putting into place there?
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely targeting kind of the AR curious and beginner to intermediate racer. So I think our only requirement is to have access to a mountain bike. And I believe that Jen even said they have access to mountain bikes. If someone doesn't have one, we might be able to round one up for somebody. So we created an intake form when people sign up to ask different questions about their levels of experience in biking as well as orienteering so that we can kind of gauge where we're at in terms of that. And I think right now, most of the participants have indicated they are more the beginner level experience of orienteering as well as mountain biking. And then we have a few that are in the intermediate and a couple of that said that we're more experienced navigators. So we're definitely gearing the workshop to try and kind of meet what people need, whether it be the very basics or breaking it up a little bit. We might end up having a couple of different groups. For example, on the bikes, we've talked about maybe splitting it if we need to, where we have a little bit more of a intermediate group versus a beginner group. So as people continue to sign up and we gauge the levels of need and experience, we'll continue to tailor to what's the need.
So putting on an event like this doesn't come at no cost. There has to be a cost involved with it. And I know that it's per participant, it's $475 per person. But I also know that you've worked really hard to line up sponsors and giveaways to kind of offset that expense. Jen, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, just we looked across the market, and there aren't a lot of adventure racing retreats. So we look in adjacent places just to kind of benchmark ourselves first. And so we're stoked that we just have cabins and meals and all of these experiences with a great team. So like that alone. But what really sets us apart is the amount of sponsors. I can't even highlight them all right here. I think we have 15, 16 sponsors.
By the way, I'll put a link in the show notes to the website so people can check all those sponsors out.
Yeah. So like everyone that is coming is going to walk away with something. We have a few Mid-Atlantic centric race directors that are giving away team races, individual races, and extending discounts. We have product coming. It's arriving. We're making some posts on social media just to kind of call it out. We're so excited and so humbled by everyone's generosity. So not only are you coming and you're going to have this experience in the community and a cabin and all of those things, you're going to walk away with something. And potentially you could be walking away with a team entry that's valued more than what you paid for our retreat. So that's freaking cool. And could you race that team entry? Could you like find someone at the event and actually team up? That would be the best part, right? So not only are we giving away things, but if there are connections made, yeah, let's get people to sign up for some adventure races before we leave the end of the weekend. That would be really, really cool. The goal behind the camp is to bring down the barriers that are entries to the sport. And for some people, financial barrier is a role that plays also. One thing I will mention to you, I'm sure that there will be Dark Zone listeners who like to contribute and take care of good causes. That costs a $475. I'm assuming if somebody wanted to, they could contact any of the three of you directly, and they could donate either all or part of it as a sort of a scholarship for someone who might want to take part who can't afford it. I'm assuming that avenue is open to those who want to donate. That would be incredible. We would welcome that. Yeah. The generosity of the community comes across time and time again. So I'll certain there. And for those who are listening, the show notes will have all of those items in there and how to contact that. And we will do our best to support by publishing all of those lists of who's being involved and things like that. So thank you for that. So what do you think the appeal is? Do you think it's the adventure racing appeal? It's better adventure racing, or is it the fact that you're building a community appeal? Like, what do you think is attracting your primary participant, right? What do you think it is? I think it's the latter. I think people want the community. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's right. A chance to, we're going to be renting cabins in the middle of the Frederick watershed, right? So we're going to be in a remote area. We're sharing meals the whole time, which was really important to the design. Right. Yeah. So it's like, and it's not so rustic.
Yeah. See, for the audience, sell that a little bit. Cabins, hot showers.
Hot water fireplaces, outdoor.
Are they going to catch their dinner, or are you going to feed them? Like, how's that going to work out there?
It's sort of forced our hand too, because it's too early here for many campgrounds to be open. So we didn't have much choice. You had to have an actual roof over people's head, et cetera.
Right.
So
there's not like I've done some weekend roundups like pack rafting. We'd all camp, but it's like in July. Yeah. It's in March. It's March and it's in the Mid-Atlantic, right? So there's clearly the weather can be 40s at night, things like that.
Yeah. Based on what we're learning from a few of the folks, it's like they're interested. Maybe they've done a solo event that's come up, but they're like, team, how would that work? Can I meet people? the adventure racing community is strong, but it's small.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, that's my sense. I don't know what Karyn or Britt would add.
I agree that I think the primary draw is more the community base of it. And also, I don't think that there are a lot of opportunities to really learn the basics of adventure racing. I think back to when I got into the sport, and I remember pulling up races online and just feeling overwhelmed by the amount of equipment needed. And some of them, like with different skills, like, whether it's pack rafting or ropes or, so many different things go into the sport that it can be extremely intimidating and overwhelming to try and figure out how to do that on your own. So I think by creating a safe place for people to gather and, talk about those things together, I know if I was starting out, if I think back to when I started back in, I think it was 2010, 2011, if I had seen something like this, I would have loved to have gone, just because for the longest time, my barrier was finding somebody that was willing to tackle that with me. And I finally found somebody that was like, hey, we'll figure it out. We'll just do it one step at a time, but it took years for me to find that person, for me to get into the sport.
It's true, right? I mean, what you're doing is you're accelerating the teammate finding capacity, right? I know, my gateway to the sport was one of these things where I had done a lot of endurance sports, and I had, I saw Eco Challenge on YouTube, and I saw the sport back then. This is 10, 12 years ago. This is even pre-Eco Challenge Fiji. This is back when the Morocco videos were still available. And literally, I made a phone call. I sent an email to NYRA, New York Adventure Racing Association, and they said, there's a guy that needs a partner. Do you want to go race with him? And I'm like, yeah. He sent me a list. You tell the story today. It's crazy. I drove to a motel in Bel Air Mountain. I shook hands with the guy I met there. We shared a motel room that night, and off we were racing the next day. And here we are now, 12, 13 years later, the best of friends. But in order for that to be successful, you have to have this really weird confluence of attitudes and events has to happen. And who's really going to make that leap? And so I think what you're all putting together is you're creating, you're shutting down the need for fate to get in people's favor. And instead you're creating that dynamic on your own.
It's intimidating. Yeah. That's why Britt dragged me around. She had all the equipment. Mm-hmm. Didn't have to think about that. She knew how to navigate. Great. I was like, my only rule is I don't want to get my feet wet. It's going to be 10 degrees or 20 degrees. I was like, I've heard about this stuff, and your feet, I don't want to talk about it. I was like, keep my feet dry because, if you want me to do it again, it'd be helpful. So that's also something that Britt and I have been talking about. She's going to be racing with Karyn and Nikki. Mm-hmm. Doing some big races this year for the women of AR. It's super cool. But part of their goals too as a team is how do we reach back and help other women? Right? Don't put me out as navigator. I could do it, but it would also build my confidence being around other strong women, learning how to accept help, etc. So we've already constructed some of these other designs so that in April, Britt's going to be leading three women, me included, that are on our mountain bike team. Right. And they're totally curious. They're totally curious about this thing called adventure racing. And would they they're looking for Karyn, they're looking for a teammate or someone with more experience that can help give them the confidence because they're still building that. They're very accomplished cyclists, but just new to the sport. So I really appreciate maybe you and Karyn can elaborate on that. It's not just about going out there and crushing it, because you guys have a lot of experience, but how do you share in it? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that's what we want people to be talking about and what we want to be talking about at the event in March too, because the events start picking up in April. And I can bet that somebody's going to be doing an event where we likely also have a giveaway, right? And then just that conversation flows, and all of a sudden they might be doing a race then or in May, June, etc.
Clearly, mindset in adventure racing plays a big role, and mindset can be developed, can be grown over time. It's not hard set; it's plastic, it's fluid, it changes over time. If someone wants to dip their toe into the water and they want to come out for the weekend, what attitude, what expectations will you give to the racers to bring to their first races? What do you want people to think about themselves and about their ability when they start adventure racing?
I think for starters, you want to always have a continuous growth mindset. So just being open to learning new ideas and trying new things. It's a beginner's mindset too. I think that's how we're constantly curious and we're learning all the time, especially in this sport, which continues to evolve. I stepped away for 4 or 5 years and it's changed drastically in that amount of time. You'd also have mentioned something about being your true self. And I think that if you're racing long enough, no matter how you start at, your true self is going to come out at some point. Maybe it's not till midnight the second day, but you can only keep it away for so long. So I think that doing enough adventure races to allow you to get to that point, if you put up a block or a barrier, getting to that point will only help you grow as a person. So you'll find it eventually. You can get away with it for a day, probably. But when you get really tired or the shit hits the fan and you're in a bad situation with your teammates and you need to figure out how to get out of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that one thing I said on the show before and I talk about is how in the course of an adventure race, if it's long enough, you see every human emotion. Yeah. Right. And Jen, you talked about the idea of working at TA. You said you were awake. Did I hear 38 hours before? Did I hear that correctly? Is that how we opened up? So which TA did you work at? What did you see there? Because I'm always curious about what the volunteers see and what they learned about adventure racing in that experience.
Well, I had so much fun, and it was they were coming in off of a trek, and it was a monster trek. You could just tell by just expressions, and people were coming in from every direction, so it was kind of chaotic. But net over net, it didn't really matter if it was the advanced teams, the ones that were leading, whether they knew that or not. There was a sense of almost like relief. There was like, okay, we made the TA. All right, now moving on to the next stage. But what really got me was this team came in. It was a mom and 2 sons. And the race started around 8, 9, I can't remember. But this is 5 a.m. And this is their kids, they're 13, 15 years old, and it's their mom. You dragged me around on a course with my mom, we would not have been civil. But they were just chilling, sitting, talking, calm. And I was just who is this family? They've been up, but so composed and so into it. And that was just one of the, I'll remember that probably for the rest of my life. It was it was an unbelievable energy. I mean, some people were just taking care of one another by the fire, drying out their feet. But there was that sense of, okay, where are my things? What do we need to do? How are we taking care of one another? Everyone was really gracious, very kind. You go to one of these mountain bike events or gravel events and you work at an aid station, the pros might come through and throw their trash on the ground. Just something the ego, there's just not a sense of that ego leading the way. And I think because you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're ranked, right? Whereas in a mountain bike race, who's in front of you, if you're in the thick of it, who's behind you, somebody's chasing you down, you're on a course. Nobody knows where they are in terms of that space. They know they're likely doing well or in the middle of the pack or wherever they are. But, it's more around how do we navigate this terrain to kind of keep going. And for some, it's, going out there to crush it. Others are how do we make the next transition area and do that safely and make some smart decisions. So there's just that care for one another.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's one thing you've seen. And I've had the chance to spend some time sitting in TAs and watching and talking to people. And I feel, and Karyn and Britt, I want you to please weigh in on this as I talk about it. It feels like clearly the take care of your teammate ethos and attitude has only grown in the sport. I see far less teams these days that are eating each other alive. And you would see that all the time, right? They'd come in and they'd be beat up and they'd be exhausted and they would be pecking, or someone wouldn't be talking. You'd always tell, right? The body language thing. And it feels to me in my sample size of the races that I go to, that teams have gotten better at being teammates with each other. Not that we don't have our moments, right? That's part of the course, part of the race. But it feels as if that ethic has sort of become stronger in racing. Have the two of you seen that experience also, or am I seeing it from a certain perspective that you don't feel is accurate?
I've been so lucky to just be on teams where that's always kind of been how it is. I think that was one of my main draws when I first started working with rootstock or racing with rootstock. It's just that everybody did care for each other, and it wasn't just about being as fast as you can, but how can we uplift each other? And when someone's going through a weak moment, how can we pull them up? I remember at nationals out in California, I guess it was that 2022? Yeah. I had carried more stuff up the mountain. Like, I tend to do really well on foot, and I do well at altitude. So I had carried some extra gear up Mammoth Mountain there. And then we got down to the bikes, and Abby, Nikki, and I were doing a pace line, and I hadn't fueled well enough, and I hadn't had enough to drink. And I tend to get in my head in pace lines on bikes. And we just stopped, and Abby took my pack. And I just remember watching her from behind, the two of them in front of me, and Abby's, a couple inches smaller than I am. And she has these two huge packs on her, and she's just going all out. And I was just so instead of feeling guilty that somebody else is carrying my load, I was so proud of her. And I don't know, I think that was the first time really racing with all women that I just had that moment of this is incredible. And I'm so proud of her. And I didn't feel like a bad teammate for having someone pull my weight. Yeah.
Will that be a topic of discussion at the camp when you talk about the idea of those inter-team dynamics and feeling like you're not measuring up, and the idea that you because giving the pack up is a huge thing, right? I've done it in races. I've given up. I've taken other people's packs. Are you going to break that down? I guess it's more of a mindset question, right? How deep will you during the camp? How deep will you get into the idea that there are certain societal expectations about being so strong and not asking for help, and help being seen as weakness? Are you going to go right at those conversations at the camp?
I don't think we go right into it, but it is certainly a big part of venture racing, letting go of your ego just to continue moving forward in the most efficient manner. So it's not even that you're fast, but if you're all moving at the same speed and relatively burning the same amount of energy, you're going to go a lot longer, and you probably go a little faster. So I think it's certainly part of the conversation. I think there's some icebreakers to get there before that, but for any, good adventure, so that has to be top of mind or top of mindset.
It's definitely going to be a part of the workshop in the morning. Karyn really had this idea of putting this camp together and reached out to us, and we're so glad that she did, because it's been a really, really fun partnership. But she also was a part of a workshop we did around confidence. And when it comes to mountain biking, and I think that much more for adventure racing, by design, it's going to put you outside of your comfort zone. If you're doing it right, that's going to happen, guaranteed. So really spending some time Saturday morning. So we hope this comes up in side conversations or over dinner, because I think everybody will have something to share about asking for help, being humble, kind of the voices in our head. And our shadow selves emerge when we're hungry and tired and cold. We get cranky. But Saturday morning, we're going to go into a bit of a workshop that includes some embodied techniques that I believe are just really important around. It's not just about the mind, but it's also our body, and bringing more awareness to what does confidence feel like in the body? How do we know when we're not feeling confident? How does our body reflect that to us? What are the mental patterns? Right, slowing that down a little bit to give everybody a window to look through. And what they realize right away is we all have those same emotions. Like you said, in an adventure race, if it's long enough, you're going to meet all those parts of yourself. So let's normalize it a little bit, like it's there. But also let's talk about proactively how we build confidence, and what does it look like to show up? And what is that feeling like Karyn's describing? It's embodied. As soon as you spoke about that, Karyn, you're there, and you can remember, here you are handing your bag over, and Abby's, riding in front of you. It's let's get in touch with those things as well. And as we go out on the mountain bike ride, and as we go into the Rogaine, let's recenter and reset around how do we want to show up. Right? Because so often we're being ruled by those unconscious patterns, right, that get in the way and manifest as anxiety and and the society teaches us very well how to do that. Mm-hmm. So let's interrupt those patterns a bit. So I think it's going to come through because I think Britt can talk about kind of her challenges. I mean, often she's a heavy hitter and she's willing to lend help, but she's also going to be racing with other guys, hopefully at World Championships. And she's had a lot of experiences. I am racing with these two. What is it, the week before the camp? Yes. Oh God, it's still so close. We're doing a 24-hour race. So it's like, I'm racing with two national champions and they love to run and and there's all this stuff and not enough biking. So I can certainly talk about, and I'll have just come off of that into the camp, surviving it. So like going in with that attitude of how do we stay humble? How do we communicate? How do we allow other people to help us out when we need it?
Jen, I look forward to your post-race comment card when you're like, needs more mountain biking.
Yeah.
So clearly there's been a lot of what's put into the physical and the emotional, the mental component that was put in there. Were there topic things that you felt were either too complex for a single weekend or were better reserved for a different experience? Or are you comfortable, the three of you, in planning it, that you hit all the points you wanted to hit?
Well, skills-wise, we're not doing any paddling, so that's a place besides navigation where beginners come in, they may not have any experience. So in a perfect situation, we would love to be able to have paddling in it. We're not going to have that in March in the space that we're in, but
yeah, that's a big lift, getting the boats, getting on the water, getting in the cold. That's a lot there. But I would feel too that from a skills-based perspective, all due respect to the paddlers out there, keep the boat above water and keep putting the oar in the water, and you'll get there eventually, right?
Yep.
Mountain biking has a bit more of a higher skill set than paddling. Here comes the hate mail from the paddling crew, but you know what I mean, people. So there's that, right? But that's a logistical issue, right? That's one thing that you weren't going to get to. But it sounds like to me, as you described the experience that you're all putting together for the participants, that you've hit all of those things that you want to touch on, right? You've all those areas that are going to get checked off inside your pretty tight time window. It sounds like that's pretty accurate. As you look down the road, as you look in a crystal ball and you say, you may want to go around 2 with this. And it's always hard to talk about the next iteration of an event before you had the first iteration. But there are things that are on the whiteboard that you say, listen, when we do this again, we're going to hit on this as well.
We have talked about maybe a second retreat or so, and we have some ideas in play for that. I'm pretty proud of what we put together. Especially being that this is the first one that we've done. I feel like we really hit all the things that I was hoping to. And again, I think time is our constraint. It's like when we started having all these ideas of all the things we wanted to cover, and then we started actually making the timeline of, okay, we have to add in the meals and breakfast and lunch and dinner and a fireside chat. It's like all of a sudden that time is gone. So I mean, yeah, if you put a bunch of adventure racers or outdoor enthusiasts in a room together, you can tell stories and go on, all day without a problem. So I do think that time is a limitation in what we're able to do. But quite honestly, I'm very pleased with what we put together and the resources that we have pulled together to really create really a great event for people. We've had so many sponsors, people donating items. We have Olga Huber helping out with navigation. We have Manette Bailey coming for a fireside chat.
I love Manette. Oh, good. I love Olga too. Don't get me wrong, Olga. No offense to you, but I love Manette. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Manette Bailey, by the way, just to go back in time, she was very instrumental in helping me get the Dark Zone off the ground. She spent a lot of time with me. She was very gracious with her time, and I've always tried to drag her on the show, and she refuses to do so. But now that you got her, I get her next. Oh, yay, Manette.
Karyn, you might not remember, but we did talk about, in a perfect world, there's an adventure race. Mm-hmm. And so, in a perfect world, if we could have the stars align, yeah, that would be cool. Come in from wherever you're coming in. We'll do our thing. Maybe you get a little rest break, and then you hit an adventure race. That would be...
You hit the whole package, right? You do all 2 disciplines.
That would be so cool. Cool.
I guess for that, too, logistically, you'd have to figure out, you'd probably need an extra day. Right. So you have to come in. So you need all day Friday, all day Saturday. And you do a 6-hour race on Sunday from 6 a.m. to noon. The road gain obviously is going to sort of check that box of practicing that skill set there. But to your point, if this gets larger, and it will get larger, it's going to be quite popular. And people have, the motivation for having you on the show is that people reached out to me and asked me to have 3 of you on. Because there's a level of popularity to this event that is reverberating through the community. And I wanted to spend some time putting a spotlight on it. And I'm glad we've had the chance to talk about it. Clearly, Women of AR had great success at the National Championship this year. And there's been in the Women of AR movement, and Stephanie Ross, was very active in there, and there's a Facebook group, and there's all of that here. Is this a natural extension of the Women of AR ethic by bringing it to life through the camp?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I think that is a little bit of where we got our motivation to do this. We're seeing all these top women teams now come together and crush races, which is really exciting. We're seeing top-notch navigators. We're seeing women, like we were able to get the fastest bike leg on the, at nationals. Like, it's pretty exciting to see what women can do together. And so I think the idea of this camp was trying to continue to build people's strengths, to continue to have women compete in the sport.
What I add is it's not quite answering that question, but I think that there is a different dynamic when you're racing as an all-women's team versus a mixed team.
So the Dark Zone had the opportunity to interview Kim Beckinsale and their team after they were the first all-female team to win an expedition race. Mm-hmm. And on that episode, they talked a lot about the dynamic of being on an all-female team and how that was different from being on a mixed-gender team. Mm-hmm. So, Britt, what are your thoughts on that in terms of racing with a single-gender team versus race with a mixed team? What's that been like for you?
I mean, I love doing both. I got my start, of course, in co-ed racing. Before I took an adventure racing hiatus, I did do several races with women's teams. We did Cowboy Tough in, 2016 or 2017 as an all-women's team. And there's something really special about it. I think you take down, you don't put up as many walls. So it's more open. It's extremely collaborative. People are really looking out for each other. Maybe you're a little bit closer in strength too. So you don't have someone way off the front, et cetera. There's a lot more, and it may be very quiet, but checking in on each other. That it's a lot more cohesive at times. I mean, you can certainly have that all across the board, but it feels more natural immediately with the women's team, I find a lot of times.
I definitely would agree with that. Again, I've mostly raced co-ed teams and have only done a couple of races now in an all-women's team. And I always just feel a little bit more at ease. It's like, even when it comes to, for example, the biking, which I've brought up numerous times because that's for me my mentally tough sport. I just feel that it's not as much of a mental struggle when I'm racing with all women. And Britt's really fast. So it's not just a speed thing, it's not just that, a guy's faster off the top or whatever, but there's just something about the way that people check in with each other, like Britt said, that makes it just kind of feel more at ease doing it.
Now, shifting a bit to your individual races this year, and I know that we're talking to some national champions here. I have to feed the fan. Need some fan service here, some racing. How did that go for your team? Tell us a bit about that.
It was pretty spectacular. The week before, full disclosure, marathon mountain bike world champs also took place in Snowshoe. So I had been gearing up for a big mountain bike race. I did not particularly train for adventure racing up until that point. I did zero running going into adventure racing nationals, which was half running or half trekking and half biking. I did world champs, had a blast. It was an incredible experience. And then, the hurricane, we were on the remnants of Hurricane Helene, and we started off pretty well, and God, it just kept going. We had no idea where we were the whole time. So we felt we were doing well. We, missed a couple of checkpoints in the trek. And so we came in a little deflated into Jen's TA, but we still had no idea. We were hearing some whispers that people had lost hours or lost many checkpoints. We didn't know. And we were just on our own course, and we kept trucking. But then we got, within 20 or so miles of the finish line, and we were hearing rumors that we were in the top 3, and we're like, I don't know how that could be. And we made some moves in the last, 3-4 hours on the bike. I convinced them that we needed to go get the last few checkpoints, and we did it. Ended up with, the fastest bike leg and all that. And it was an incredible experience with those two. I had never raced with Karyn or Nikki, but Rootstock reached out to me about racing nationals as a women's team. And I was like, hell yeah. I didn't have any other adventure races on my calendar at that point. I was like, if I only get to do one, this is the one it's going to be, and it's going to be with these two.
So I want to kick it to Karyn in a second to have her chat a bit about it too, but I always like to tell the story that the TA, and Jen was there too, I think we saw each other there, I was ignoring you. I was staying away from your team because I didn't want to keep you in the TA any longer than you had to, and I didn't want to jinx you. And so for the adventure racer out there, if you're doing a race, and if I'm avoiding you at all costs, you're probably doing really well. And I remember telepathically being like, I think I want them to leave the TA because I know how good they're doing and they need to get out on the course. Why put down that? Was that the TA with the nachos in the bag?
Walking tacos. I was like, I cannot eat a walking taco right now.
But that was the walking taco TA, right? That's what I'm thinking of, right?
Yeah, I was at the one before that. Yeah, the walking. Yeah.
I was like, you need to leave here immediately. And it worked out well. Congratulations. But I remember this being like, you got to go. You got to get out of here. Karyn, what was your memory like of that day? Because it was such a wonderful result for the women of AR.
My memory is a lot of mountain biking. That's always my struggle, like I just always kind of don't have enough faith in myself that I'll be able to get through it. And quite honestly, like I had just met Britt and I was so intimidated that here I am racing with this professional mountain biker and how in the world was I going to keep up with her? And again, this is where it's just one of those amazing experiences of her extending so much like kindness towards me. There was never a moment of like me feeling like I was annoying her, slowing her down. She just would keep turning to me and like, hey, you're doing great. And her and Nikki would just keep, feeding out optimistic, words to me and just really kind of help me get through that section. And same with Jen at the TA, she just extended so much kindness to me. So that meant a lot too. And I just remember wanting to get off the bike and just thinking, oh, there's more biking. And I don't know, it was just very intimidating to me.
Because of the water. They had to add the biking on near the end. So you had to drop all the way down into what would have been a water TA and to go back, to go all the way down that long descent, which, by the way, in a van wasn't that hard. Just want to say it. You had to go all the way down in the van and then you had to come all the way back up. And I remember seeing teams on both sides of that.
Yeah. And I do, actually, my favorite part of biking is climbing. I guess like strength to weight ratio, I'm a pretty good climber. And so we're going up these hills and, we get to the top of Snowshoe and then we decide to get these extra couple of points and we kind of like turn the corner and there's just this another huge steep hill. And I sort of had a little mini panic attack. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the one that slows our team down and we're not going to get to the finish line on time. So Britt just takes my pack. And this was another one of those moments I will never forget in adventure racing. And she's just cruising, like pedaling up that hill. And finally we start to see other teams because for a while we were by ourselves. And that's why I thought we were going to be late. And we just see other teams and Britt's just zipping up this hill and everybody else is kind of like walking their bikes or struggling. And she just made it look like it was so incredibly easy. And it was just one of those moments of like, almost comical how easy she made it look.
Yeah.
It made the ending a lot better.
As I was walking my bike up the hill, she'd be passing by me. And for the record, for those at home, Britt is actually blushing a little bit right now on the podcast. I know there's this. It's a radio-based game, but Britt is there. You come across as being very grateful for the chance to do this as a personal pursuit, and you want to give it to other people. Like I think that's. I don't want to be too reductive in what the goal of the camp is, but that's really what you're trying to put together, and you want to make sure that happens. And you want to give, and we all know that if there's times in life when there's that you can only keep something by giving it away. Right. And you want people to have the same experience that you've had. And that ethic kind of, it's not only for adventure racing, other sports have it also, Jen, but as you kind of touched on it before, you were saying, it appears to be special inside the sport and that you wanted to create this special place for female racers, for women racers to come and to be safe and to be secure and to do all of that. Jen, I want to circle back before because I do want to underline this point. You mentioned before that people who fall along the gender spectrum are invited to attend. Talk a bit about that again, because I want to put an underline on that and make sure that everybody who's listening knows how open the camp is.
It's absolutely important to me, especially in today's climate. It's something that Britt and I absolutely value. and it doesn't get in the way. Like, we have no challenges in terms of competition, what it means to have folks that identify differently. I think we're all on a spectrum of some sort or other. You talked about kind of the cycling spectrum. And I think even in my own age, that's changed, right, as we evolve and we mature. So it's really a core value of, I think, all of ours. I love that it's a part of USARA. We just recently read their kind of their DEI and their position in a time when people that identify differently are being shut out of sports. Right. And there's just different hate and bullying going on. That's not what this is. I mean, certainly we want to compete, we want to stretch ourselves, but it's more of an intrinsic motivation. And we don't want that to stand in the way. So, it's just something we value. It's on a race team. We have safe space guidelines that we publish. Whether you come to Soar or you come to one of our mountain bike rides, we will not tolerate any type of hate or kind of judgment against how you want to identify as a human. You're totally welcome here.
And clearly the dark zone supports that same ethic that the camp has. Right. The dark zone wants to be very, very clear as we're going forward that we agree with expectations and policies that make the sport more open. And we, too, are proud of what USARA does with their DEI policy, and that we want to play no role in excluding anybody from this sport. And when we started the conversation, we talked about the fact that adventure racing sees itself as being different from other sports in its welcoming nature, its community nature. We want to keep that going here. And so I want to close out our time now because we're getting close. Any final words about Soar? Give me your last final sales pitch. And anybody can join if they want. Someone's sitting home, they're listening to the podcast, listening to the show, and they want to take part. What's going to get them over the edge to sign up? What's the last thing they need to hear?
That's a great question. I imagine a lot of your audience has experienced adventure racers. So what I'd say to them is you know a lot of people and you share in communities too. So if you know of someone that's curious about the scene, or maybe they've been racing a little bit, and want that exposure. I mean, we've really designed a camp that's really going to expose them to different people and different experiences, and hopefully new friendships. So I would encourage anyone that's listening to kind of share it within their network. Or shit, come. Come on in, right? It would definitely add. So I think, it's the strengths that everyone is bringing, right? And how to share in that. So, it's going to be a really unique opportunity. I think people are going to walk away, with the feeling of accomplishment, but more than that, there's going to be an intimacy and a depth, a connection, both within themselves and with other people, seeing themselves reflected in a way that kind of amplifies them in the direction that they want to move. That would be my hope, right? That there's too much noise in the environment right now around hate and separation and everything else. So what a great way to kick off 2025 and a season and taking that experience back into the other areas of your life. I mean, it's what we need more of.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another episode of the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. Thanks again for being here. Thank you to everyone from Soar for joining us. Be sure to check out those show notes. Great camp coming up right around the corner this March 2025. Also, for those of you who are so inclined, you could follow the Women of AR over on Facebook. They're doing a great job on the social media front. And heck, they're out there winning races, which is even better. All right, folks, remember, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.